taking 1 minute 56 seconds out of Duncan's lead. His speed was deceptive as he kept the Porsche neat and tidy around the corners. Duncan was only third fastest, fighting to balance the power of the big V8 whilst getting the bulky car around the slow hairpins. He would fight back in the second section that suited the Mustang better, but would still drop another 4 seconds to Voldegaard. Gerard Massey was still attacking despite his disappointment of the previous day. He was second fastest up the escarpment, but would then set the fastest time on the second stage. He had raised the car the previous evening and was suffering a bit from understeer, but had begun his steady fight back up the leaderboard and was now 12th. Steve Perez drove a steady pace. With over 20 minutes between him and Voldegaard and a cushion of 15 minutes to Jeff Bell behind, it was time to sit back and wait for the leading cars to have a problem. On the smooth, fast second stage, he was enjoying himself so much he decided to push and set the second fastest time. Graham Alexander had managed to change the crossmember the previous evening and could once again push with confidence. A small off into a bank on the co-driver's side was the only incident of the day, and the damage was minimal, and they held on to fifth. The sun had been shining for the early runners, but heavy showers had already begun by the time Jonathan Savage started up the escarpment. The extra water on the road made conditions even trickier for those running behind. Steve Troman enjoyed the second stage so much he wanted to do it again. His mechanics had cured a brake bias problem, giving Steve more confidence on the fast stage. Jean-Pierre Mondron was another driver delighted by the day's stages, the Kronos mechanics providing him with a new car every morning. A trouble-free run meant he maintained his 9th position. The sister car of Thierry Bosco also had a good day after suffering with a broken steering rack on the previous day. Kravos had also spent the previous evening stuck in the stage with a broken steering rack and had eventually made it into Arusha at 11 p.m. With little to gain by pushing, they were now focused on getting the Mercedes to the finish. Kishan Bandari was again setting impressive times before a little over-exuberance on the second stage resulted in a collision with a tree. The front end was badly damaged and the car needed to be towed out of the stage. Romy Bamra lost all steering early in the first stage when a universal bolt fell out. They were able to repair it and continue, but were grateful it hadn't happened higher up the escarpment. Michel Pachokos and Nick Patel were complaining of a loss of power on the second stage in their ex-Mike Kirkland Datsun 260Z, which had been rebuilt after John Lloyd's roll in 2007. They were holding on to 16th overall. Alba Michel and Patrick de Connick had a coming together with a bus on the second stage. Their once beautiful Porsche now looking like an elephant had sat on it, but they were able to continue.
Oh my God.
Roddy Sachs made a welcome return to the rally after spending the day in Arusha straightening his car. He would have a new navigator too, Steve Harris, who had recovered from his accident with Wayne Kieswetter and didn't want to miss out on the remainder of the event.
Yeah. It's all new now. Just the body's dented, but everything is done. All the suspension, yeah.
Day 5 would take the competitors back into Kenya, crossing the border at Namanga, but not before a second run through the Sanya Ju Longido stage. They would then do a loop from Ilbissel to Maili Tisa before a long 78-kilometre stage to Amboseli National Park for the rest day. The rain had held back overnight and the first stage was considerably drier than 2 days before. Drivers had to contend with the often consuming fun dust, sometimes disappearing completely from view. Duncan was again fastest on the first 2 stages. A broken bonnet pin was the only real concern when the bonnet came loose and nearly flew up onto the windscreen. Voldegaard lost all the time he had worked so hard to gain the previous day with a puncture that cost him 4.5 minutes. Then a navigational error cost them more time on the second stage, and even though they were second fastest, they were still a further minute down on the Mustang ahead. Graham Alexander was third fastest on the first stage in the dust. The car was running well and they were settling into a comfortable pace. Gerard Marcy was also pushing. With fourth fastest on the first stage, he was making rapid progress up the leaderboard. Jeff Bell was still comfortable in fourth and was consistently fifth fastest on all three of the day's stages. The only problem they had were a few holes in the floor that sucked in dust like a hoover on the first stage. Richard Arrowsmith decided the best approach to the dust was flat out, which inevitably resulted in this spin, temporarily disappearing in a cloud of dust before miraculously popping out in the right direction. Paul-Eric Jarry was not so fortunate, damaging the front suspension and knocking the wheel so far out of line that the wheel bearing seized. He lost an hour and 20 minutes and plummeted down to 12th. Paul would lose more time stuck in the dust of slower cars that were now in front of him. Disaster also struck the Porsche of Thierry Bosco. The right front corner was damaged and they were eventually forced to stop in the section to try and repair it. Not an easy task in thick dust. Several drivers were relieved to make it to the first roadside service before the Namanga border crossing.
Very good.
Much better?
Oh yes, Dave. Finally we had no problems.
Car's running well today.
Car is running perfectly.
Very, very deep dust, and unfortunately we were all bunching up together so we couldn't see. So we were just going off into the bush. You can see. It was the only way through.
Is that all?
Yeah,
Sure.
I wouldn't do it anymore.
One touch?
Do one more.
Yeah, boss.
Hard one. I hope we don't do it again. It's the last time, right? Yeah. I'm glad to hear it.
Gerard Marcy was once again fastest in the third stage run into Amposelli, showing what might have been had he not lost so much time. This was despite stopping for a minute when he thought he had a puncture. Steve Perez was also going well, consolidating his grip on third overall. They lost time on the second stage with a small off and were stuck for a period before local villagers came to the rescue. On the third stage they lost time when a pair of camels decided to block the road. Ian Duncan backed off on the third stage and was fourth fastest, a minute behind Marcy. With a comfortable 5-minute lead over Voldegaard, he was able to conserve the car ready for the next day's service. Stefano Rocco was second and third fastest on the opening two stages before the rear diff exploded. He lost an hour changing it and would be forced to run in the dust of slower cars in the third stage. Aslam and Fahaz Khan had had their share of problems during the course of the first 4 days, not least a complete electrical failure on the second. Then, having got lost, they ended up going the wrong way and finally blocked the route when their car died as they attempted to turn round. Aziz Techpar had a bit of a coming together with a tree stump, but aside from a new look, the only mechanical damage was a bent track rod end. Navigator Andy Nagy was able to effect some bush mechanics and they were soon on their way. The Colt Lancer of Minesh Rathod suffered 2 punches during the day, but otherwise reported no major problems with the car and were lying midfield in 23rd. Amboseli National Park at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro boasts one of the most diverse and fragile ecosystems in Kenya. With sweet water from underground springs feeding the permanent swamp in the middle of the park, Amboseli boasts one of the best-studied elephant populations in the world. Researchers from all over come to study the big cats, other carnivores like hyena, as well as the large diverse